Good evening everyone, welcome back to Piccadilly. It's taken a few days to get all the transfers on, but I can finally say they are all done. Okay, on all the carriages and the DVT. It's all the transfers are on. So what's next? Well, not all the transfers went on perfectly, and if you ever try this, you'll probably find the same. You may find the odd little bit of cracking from time to time, and you may find that some of the transfers just don't sit properly and they don't look right, and you end up taking it off, scrapping that one and putting another one on. So that's why, if you remember my video right back at my beginning on YouTube, when I did the transfer of the Class 150, I suggested that you make a few of each one, and then so if you do make any mistakes or something goes wrong in any way, shape or form, you've always got some spares. And I'm quite relieved. I had a big problem with this particular side here, and it just looked awful. But gratefully, I had another transfer and I was able to put that one back on. Okay, now, what I want to show you, I'm just going to move these ones out of the way, and the locomotive, put those up there behind out the scenes. Now, that, if you look at that, is a classic example of some of the things that can happen, particularly around the windows where you cut. Occasionally, this is one of the worst, by the way. You've got all these areas here where it's just not sat properly. Well, the paints come off, or the transfers come off, the colours come off. So what you need to do is touch it up. Now, I've mixed up some rail blue, or this colour blue, and I did that with some of this. And this is my own concoction, but it's like a very dark ultramarine. Ultramarine with a bit of black in it, to be quite frank with you. And I've mixed up 3 parts of the blue to 1 part of the dark. Okay, now it's not an exact match, but quite frankly, for the small amount that you need, I think it'll be absolutely fine. And I've put it in the daylight, and I can't see. That's it in its raw state. That's one that's already done. So you do get dull patches, and I'll show you how I deal with that in a bit. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm not going to show you all of this on cam, but with a very, very fine 4-0 brush, literally just going to dab over those bits. Okay, I'll just do a little bit on cam so you can get the idea of what I'm doing. So I'm literally just any areas where it's not matched up, and I'm tilting the carriage so that I can see into the window frame, if you know what I'm saying. And then I look down on it, I tip it up the other way, I then look that way and just look at all the angles. Can I see any white? And if the answer is yes, well, obviously I need some colour. So I'm just going to put colour onto all of these particular areas, just like that. Again, looking that way. Actually, there's a bit there which is not consumed properly. And that way. Just do the one more and then I'll finish this off cam. Okay, but you get the idea that some of the transfers just need a little bit of touch up. And this paint I've used is, I wouldn't say it's watery, but it's not full consistency. And the reason for that is because it's more likely to sit properly if it's not. If you use full consistency paint, the chances are it might blob up and leave a blob on the surface. So when you come to put or flood the surface with varnish, it's not going to sit properly and you'll see it. And that would be, well, not nice. Okay, I'll just finish this one. A little bit just there. Okay. Hopefully you can see what I've done there. Just tidied up the windows. So I'm going to turn the cam off now, get the other half of the carriage done. As you can see, all that side's done. And I'll take it from there and show you what I do next. Okay, speak to you in a minute. Right, welcome back. I've now gone round every coach, all the windows, and blocked them all up. Right, the next stage. If on most carriages, the steps are yellow, and also the lifting equipment are Mark III. It's just got this slight bulge that sticks out from the side of the carriage at each end. So they need to be yellow. So this will take a little while, but obviously just need to paint into the steps like so, and I like to do underneath. Now obviously that's going to be weathered, but at the end of the day it still needs to be done. And also that little lifting equipment bit just there. Okay, so all of these need to be completed. So that's the next stage for me. I will now go off cam once again and get all those ones done. I'll just finish this one there so you can see one completed side. There you go. It's all these little fine details that do make the real thing. Now, granted, I'm missing off a few details, and that's just the nature of the beast. I can't help it. Like, for example, carriage numbers, they're so small. I can't, the printer won't even print them. I just see a white shadow. I can't possibly even think about reading it, so I'm just not going to worry about it. An end gauge as well, you're not going to see it. Anyway, I'll get all of those yellow bits done and I'll show you those in a minute. Right, so there we go. All of those are now done on every carriage. Now, I just want to point out this as well. On the detail front, I've put some warning mark or warning stickers in the corners of the DVT, just above the two sets of doors at either end, the guard's door and also the driver's door. Okay, as per the prototype. Now, if you notice, if I show you, say, this one, I don't know whether you can pick that up from the light. If I twist it back and forth, you might be able to see most of the carriage is quite shiny, except this dull area down here, which is where I've put the paint. And you may even be able to pick it out just also around the windows. Okay, now at the end of the day, that will look odd. So what I'm going to do is something quite radical. And you might say to me, oh no, don't do that. Well, trust me, it works. I've done it a few times. I'm going to be using some of this Humbrol clear varnish. Now you might say to me I should spray this on. Well, I could, but you see the thing is, to put the transfers on, really, it's better with the windows refitted because you can actually work your way, get all the paint on, that you touch up paint and get it absolutely looking perfect. And you can't spray it unless I now go back up and mask all the windows up again. And to be quite frank with you, I don't want to do all that. It's taking a long time otherwise. So I'm going to dip my brush in water into the varnish. Now I'm literally just going to pull it on. You might say, oh no, that's awful. Well, again, just trust me. I'm literally just going to pull it on. I'm making sure that there's a decent amount in the water. There's not any areas where it's not sitting properly. It's got to sit flat. So by leaving the carriage as it is, the varnish will just stay there. Now, obviously, you can't do two sides at once. You've got to leave it both sides. You can't, I mean, you've got to do one side at a time, I'm saying. Actually, that was starting to move and gather in one area. See, by doing this and pulling it on, the varnish will self-level. That's the idea anyway. Actually, there's a big pool sitting there. I wonder if there's a dip in the side. But anyway, I'm going to keep going. I'm using the light that I've got above me to see where I am. Just going across all the window frames. I'm really not that worried, to be quite frank with you. I've done this a few times and I know that it will sit properly. As long as you cover every area, it'll be fine. Okay, now put that out the way, ready to dry. Now I'm just going to have a quick check. I think, yes, that side was one I did earlier. There's a hair on there for some odd reason. Yeah. So actually, it does sit all right. All right. And I'll show you the DVT. And that side has not been done. You can see that the pale turquoise there is not shiny, whereas the transfer is. But that's the side that has been done. Now, some people are of the opinion that models should not be glossy or even a satin finish, and I very well respect you for that. If you're one of those people that firmly believe that, fine, you're more than welcome to. I quite like to see a shiny body side on a train. As it's going past, I quite like it catching the light and the glint of the light. So I like to have mine not glaringly shiny. I mean, I don't think, like I just showed you that one, I don't think that's glaringly shiny, but I mean, it may look glaringly shiny in this light actually, but I am shining it underneath the light, which is just obviously up here. But in normal lighting conditions, it just catches the glint of the light, just as a normal carriage would. So I quite like that, but you have to make that decision. If you prefer to have a matte finish, well, put a matte finish on. Satin finish, put a satin finish on. It's entirely up to you. I am just using this stuff, but you know, you put on what you feel you want to. So anyway, that's my next stage. I'm going to get all the carriages glossed up on both sides, and that will take a while because obviously it's got to dry. You can't do the other side until the first side is dry. That's goes without saying, because obviously if you turn it over, then you're going to muck it up, aren't you? So anyway, I'll catch you really soon when all of the carriages are done and then it's dry, and then we'll start thinking about weathering. Okay, I'll catch you really soon. Take care. Bye for now. Okay, right, all of the carriages are now dry, and I've done the DVT on both sides too. I might put another coat on that side because it's not quite as shiny as that side, but I'll do that in a minute. Now, the next thing, I'm going to start the weathering process. Now, I can't show you pictures from the internet because I don't want to get into trouble with copyright. I just don't feel comfortable about doing that. But if you notice, if you were to look at pictures of the WAG train, you'll find that the DVT does seem to be a lot cleaner on the roof than the other carriages, and they're getting dirtier the more closer to the locomotive. So I am going to weather the carriage that is next to the locomotive a lot heavier, or slightly more heavier, let's put it like that. When I say heavy, I'm not going to make it black or anything like that, but I am going to put a bit more grime on the carriage next to the locomotive than I am on the DVT. But what I do want to do on each of the carriages is to put a pin wash. Now, I've used some of this, okay, and I've put 2 little dollops into a pot, put some water in it with some washing up liquid. Now, the reason for that is because I've got to get rid of the water, the surface tension. Now, what I'm after is if I put that on the side, hopefully you can see what I'm doing here, it washes away and is almost disappearing, okay? That's the sort of consistency I'm after. So I'm now going to paint that on across the roofs, and you'll notice it's not very dark at all. Right, next stage, I've just added a little bit more black to the pin wash, Just going over these end bits and just blending it in with my finger. All I'm trying to do is pick out that detail, okay, at the end there, and blend it in so that the pin wash just goes into all those little crevices. Just like that. Okay, and I've done the DVT as well. Right, this one, so all the grime seems to be where the ridges are, not on the bit at the edge. If you look at the pictures of the Mark IIIs, there seems to be a grimy panel running down the centre of the roof. And these two end strips, the silver end strips running across both sides, seem to be a lot cleaner. I think I'm just going to let that dry now, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. Now, in the meantime, I'm just going to start on the locomotive. Now, again, I'm going to put the pin wash on, just like I've done with the other thing. And for this bit, I am using the brush, as you can see, because I want all the areas to be quite grimy. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to be going over the grill because I don't want to. Well, actually, I will. I'll just take a bit of that paint off and just sort of go over just to dirty it down. I'm not putting a lot on there. And then just a little bit of grime on the outside. Not a lot. Okay? Just like that. Now, when I come to use the airbrush, you'll notice that this area where the 67 has got the exhaust, you've got grime running all the way right to the very end and about halfway up here. The whole roof is grimy, but that might be sufficient. I want to let that dry and just see what it looks like. I've got all the dirt going into the side bits there. Now the next bit I'm going to do is just a tiny little bit running down these bits here, a little bit down the, actually that's too much, I'll take that off with the water. I don't want to make this 67 absolutely disgusting. That's not the point of it at all. But just to put a tiny, tiny, tiny dribble just on the sides there, so it catches the handles and little indentations on the body side. So a little bit down there into those door handles, just a little dribble there. It's down there into the footwell. Actually, I didn't do that on the other side, did I? A bit in the footwells, because they would be a bit grimy. Just a little bit there. Just take that back off, just sort of spread that across. Because the body sides are generally a lot cleaner than the rest of the locomotive. Now, a tiny little bit on the ends. Actually, if I hold it like that, don't want to muck up what I've just done. Just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit on the end, not a lot. And there's a bit just there. Again, just a tiny, tiny little bit on the end there. It's just to give the impression there's dirt. Okay, right, the underside. Now, I'll show you the DVT as I did that the other day. Or actually, I did this a long time ago. Now, you can see you've got this track grime colour. Now, to achieve that, it's probably not ever so clear with that, but I'm using that for a lighter shade, and that one again, oops, for the other shade. So I'm going to paint the whole of it with that, and then sort of dry brush or blob bits of that on. All right, you'll hopefully see what I mean. You might be thinking, well, where are the wheels? I've already done those. So you've got this light and dark look on the wheels. Hopefully you can see that quite clearly. All right. The reason I say that is because I'm not a fan of painting anything one colour. I think things should be multiple colours and often look an awful lot better if they are. So anyway, I'm going to take the lids off of these. I think what's in the lid is probably going to be more than enough. Actually, that's a bit dry, so I'm just going to wet that down a bit. Just add a bit of water to that because it was drying a little bit. Now, you've got to be obviously very careful with this, but I'm just going to paint what I see in there. I'm not worried about it ever so slightly touching the body side. I'm doing both sides together. I'll tilt it so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, now picking up some of the paler colour, often it comes in stripes. Because obviously it dribbles down. So you end up with this sort of striping effect. So I'm just going to go downward strokes. So hopefully you can see. So I'm literally just going up and down. See in there, a few streaks there. Right, now for the 67. Again, I can't show you a picture from the internet, but I have got one on the iPad just to my left. Okay, now I'm going to be using the same two colours as I have done before, which are basically those two. Okay, you probably can't see, but actually I'll show you the lids. It might be easier to work out the colours. Okay, those two. These just happen to be Revel colours, but again, any brand will do. Now, on the picture, I can't see these locomotives having silver buffers. So I'm going to obliterate those. I'm using the darker of the greys at the moment, dark grey browns, and I'm going to paint the buffer beam. Because again, I can't see. The buffer beam to me looks quite dark. So I'm just going to paint that out. Again, painting out all these buffers out, both sides. Actually, I think I'm going to use a bigger brush because this is going to take a little while. Going back to the brush I had just before, which is this one, just being careful, obviously. Painting that out. And also, I am going to put a little bit of the brown onto the coupling. Okay, both ends. Hopefully you can see this. And I'm going to paint the bogies. Actually, I'll put it down now. Just like that. A little bit behind there. Now, if this was a 00 locomotive, I would take the wheels out and I would paint the edge of the wheels with the similar colour. But on this occasion, I'm not going to do that. Just checking the picture. Right, now, it looks like these battery boxes are painted, or grimed up anyway. Just there. And there is a streaking across there, but not a lot. And I'll do that with the other colour in a minute. I'll do the one side. So I'm going to paint the other part of the bogie on the top and the underside edge just inside there, like that. And I'll do the other buffer beam shortly. Now again, referring to the picture, it looks like the bogies are a lot paler. So I'm literally just going to dance a little bit of that pale colour over the bogies. Not a massive amount, because I want you to be able to see the dark, which is what you can do on the real thing. So I'm actually just going to put a bit lighter there. In fact, I feel it's gone a little bit too light, so I'm just going to dial that down a bit. Okay. Now, the battery box, I'm just going to use some of the pale. Just a little bit, not a lot. So again, you can still see it. Now, this bit, I'm just going to take the brush. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the paint and dry brush this. Bit of the pale. And then flick. And then rub it off. Because the 67 is very much like the 66. The grime only goes up to the fuel tanks and doesn't seem to be on the fuel tanks quite so much. Again, just referring to the picture, the fuel tanks seem to be quite black. Just like that. Now again, picking up the end of the locomotive, the buffer beam seems to be quite dark, whereas that bit in there, hopefully you can see what I'm doing, is paler. Now I'm just dabbed it on, and I'm going to dab on over the coupling as well, because I don't want anything shiny. Now I'm going to do the buffers again because they're not covered particularly well. So I'm just going to give that a second coat, and I'm going to go back over with this colour. That's better. And I will need to put a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of black on those. Okay. Right, now I did say I was going to use some white, but actually I found this skin colour, which might actually be a little bit more appropriate. So I'm just going to take a bit off, and then literally just the tiniest little bit, not a lot. And then just flick up a tiny bit there, and then rub it back. And rub it back. It's not rubbing it off, it's just adding this extra little bits of detail. And I'm going to do the same on the end there. Not a lot. Bit at that end. Washing the brush and just going back in with that dark pin wash again. Just sort of dull it down a tad. Okay. So you end up with a variation. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of highlight. I have put some black on the buffers, highlight on the buffers, so that the buffers actually appear to be different tones. Again, I don't want to highlight these couplings, but again, it's just adding to the effect. Just adding to the effect. That's all I'm doing. Okay, and wipe a bit of that off. Oops, I haven't picked any up. And just dance a little bit across there, bit there, tiny bit there. It's just to add a tiny, tiny, tiny effect. Right, it's airbrushing time. It is the following day, as I promised. So this is the airbrush I have, which is an Iwata Neo TR1, or TRN1, and I love it. It's a bit different to the normal airbrush, in the sense that it doesn't have the trigger on the top. It is a dual action, but you've got this standard trigger underneath, which is very much more traditional in the sense of more like a normal spray gun. And I quite like that. I feel I've got a lot more control with this than I used to have with the ones with the button sort of on the top, if you like, and just sort of here. Okay, so now for airbrushing, I'm going to be using some of this. Again, there are lots of other brands available, but I'm going to fill this up with about half full in the cup. So I don't know whether you can just about make that out in there. Okay. Pop the lid back onto that one so that it doesn't spew everywhere. And then I'm going to take some dollops of this colour, mix it in, give it a good old stir, and have a couple of dollops, like so. And I think I'll go with just one more. Alright, give that brush a bit of a swizzle out and put the lid back on that paint. Now what I need to do before I start spraying is to put the lid back on and then just bubble back. So I'm putting my finger over the edge and I'm just gently pulling on the trigger. And I can now hear the paint bubbling inside the can. In fact, you can see it coming out the top. So I give that a bit of a wipe. Now I want to check. Actually, I've got a few bits on here. Let's get rid of those. Now, before I actually start spraying, I want to check the spray pattern. Right, that's a bit heavy for me. So I'm going to take that right down. Still a bit much. Actually, about there. Yep, that'll do. Right, now, before I go any further, I'm going to put the locomotive on its side and I'm going to do the lightest pass. I'm going to tighten that up a bit more. And that is probably all I'm going to do there. A little bit here. And a little bit on the other end. But if you remember, I did a lot of that with the brush. All I'm trying to do now is just catch the bottom of the body. Okay, and that is probably all I'm going to do there. If you can just about make that out. That's on that. Right, now for the top. Now I am going to put a bit more grime on the top. In fact, I'm going to turn the locomotive that way and do the strokes. I'll have a bit more of a, yeah. Not a lot, but just grime it down just a little bit more. Okay, now that's probably all I'm going to do for the locomotive just at this moment, because I'm going to turn my attention to the coaches. Now, if you remember, I said to you, the coaches, they are very bright, browny, grimy at the ends. So I'm going to go, not heavy, but not light either. Okay, that's one end. They do get very grimy at the ends. And I think I'm going to have that coach next to the locomotive. Looking at the others, yes, I think so. So I'm just going to do just a little bit over the roof, not a lot. Okay, that'll probably be about it. So it's just to grime it down just a tad and tone down that really quite bright silver. So moving on to another one. Now, I think what I'll do is, again, you don't want to watch me do all of these, I'm sure, and I don't want to bore you to tears. So I think I'll go off cam now, get the rest done, and I'll see you in a minute once I've done all the ends and just grimed the roofs just ever so slightly like I just showed you. Okay, so all of the coaches now are done. And I also did just a small, tiny little bit at the front of the DVT and just over the buffer beam, okay, which will have gone up onto the yellow just a tiny little bit. Okay, now ready for the black. Now, if you remember, I mixed up this the other day, that sort of grimy black wash, and that will be perfect. Right, I'm hoping you can see that. Now, what I'm going to do first of all, just check the spray pattern. And I'm zooming off the front. Okay. Now, I've gone quite heavy on the locomotive. And oops, it needs a little bit, just a tad on the side there. Right, I'm happy with that. And once that dries, I think that'll be fine because it will dry a bit lighter, I think. Okay. And there we are. That is the finished train. Now, what did I finish up doing to the 67? Well, like you saw, I blew some black over the top, or some brown first, some the roof grime type colour, and then I dabbed some black, or sprayed some black over it. But then I just went in with the brush a little bit around the exhaust with some matte black, and then around the outside of that, I then just dabbed some water just to blend it out, okay? And then once that had dried, I then went over the whole roof with some matte varnish, which is this stuff. Okay, again, the varnishes are available. Although having said that, to find one in that size of tin was quite difficult. Gloss and satin, yes, but not matte. Don't know why. In the local shop that I went and bought that from, they didn't have that in matte other than that brand. Okay, now the next time you see this train will be on the layout and I'll give you a few running shots of it. Okay, I'll see you in a minute. There we are. The 67 and the WAG train is now sitting in Manchester Piccadilly waiting to depart. My pathetic attempt at a blowing whistle.